Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thanks as always for joining us this week. It's been a bit. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. A lot going on for Judicial Watch even during the Christmas and holiday break that I'll give you an update on. We have a new lawsuit over gerrymandering, new documents about the CDC and COVID, plus a new lawsuit over the wild abuse of power by Garland's Justice Department in terms of targeting parents. So you won't want to miss that. First up, though, over the break, Judicial Watch was censored again. Specifically, I was censored again, this time by TikTok. I went to log on to look at cat videos, as I want to say. And it turns out that I had been, my account had been permanently banned for violations of community guidelines. Now, normally one gets warnings for permanent bans like that, but I had received no warnings from the Chinese-operated, Chinese communist-owned TikTok, so I'm banned. I don't know why. I post videos that I've posted elsewhere with no problem. Of the most recent video, I don't know if it resulted in my ban. I criticized Obama, Biden, and Hillary. I think we're going to be able to play the video here, but I'll show you this is the type of video I would ordinarily post on TikTok. Let's play it now. Is Durham going to do more? I don't know. He should. He should question Hillary Clinton before a grand jury. He should question Joe Biden, dare I say it, before a grand jury. And of course, the head of the grand conspiracy, Barack Obama. So you can see what is so frightening about that video that would warrant a ban or anything like that from TikTok. And it's obvious that I'm an opponent of the regime. As I jokingly noted, I'm not sure which regime they're concerned about my being an opponent of. Is it the Chinese communist regime or the regime here in the United States? But many Americans have asked why TikTok is allowed to be in the United States, because it's owned by the Chinese communists and it's a dangerous risk as a result. And those are valid concerns. Others have asked, why am I on TikTok? Well, I was on TikTok because it's one of the most widely accessed internet sites in the world, if not certainly in the United States. I think it has now, I don't know if this is a worldwide number or a US number, but it's the #1 app being downloaded. It's also getting now more hits than Google. So of course I'm going to be on it. I'm going to go on and try to educate people wherever I can if I'm allowed to. But instead I'm faced, and Judicial Watch is faced with outrageous censorship, permanently banned. No contact from TikTok. The media's covered it. TikTok isn't even talking to the media about its outrageous ban of me. So this is on top of my having been locked out of Twitter for months after posting a perfectly correct tweet about hydroxychloroquine that Twitter had specifically told me the exact same tweet was not in violation of its rules. Then later they knocked me out. We know that YouTube is censored Judicial Watch as well. Facebook is suppressing Judicial Watch too. So the censorship is real. And I encourage you to follow us everywhere. We're obviously on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter. But we're also on the new alternative websites, Parler, Getter, Gettr, Telegram, which is another place you can go to get information, Rumble, which is the alternative to YouTube. So I encourage you to follow us everywhere, because you never know when we're going to be locked out. I don't know if I say something now that the Google overlords don't like, will knock me off of YouTube. I don't know. Maybe I'll be knocked off of Twitter for saying something. Maybe Judicial Watch will. And of course, I encourage you to go to our website and share your email and address with us. I mean, your email address and your mail address, because in many ways, we have to be prepared to rely on the mails to communicate with each other, or email as an alternative as well, given the outrageous censorship by TikTok. Now, Twitter has knocked out the account of Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's the second prominent politician to have an account removed, at least in the United States, by TikTok. The most prominent politician, obviously, was the president of the United States at the time, President Trump. So you have these social media companies, in my view, engaged in fraud. And how is it fraudulent? It's because they're lying about their reasons for banning people or censoring them. It's not based on a careful application of rules in a fair manner. They're doing it because of politics. So when they're lying to users, they're lying to consumers, they're lying to regulators, they're lying to Congress, they're lying to shareholders. And in my view, all of these companies should be subject to investigations by the Justice Department, the Federal Trade Commission, Securities Exchange Commission. And to the degree they're violating laws at the state level as a result of this fraud, they should be investigated by state law enforcement as well. And there is no Section 230 exemption to fraud. They're just lying. They're saying they're doing it for one reason, and it's obvious to anyone with a brain that it's targeting conservatives, targeting Trump and his supporters, and targeting anyone else who dares to deviate from a government line, no matter how absurd. You saw this with coronavirus, where certain information about coronavirus, if you said it, would have gotten you banned. Oh, I think coronavirus was ginned up in a Chinese laboratory. That would have gotten you banned, censored. Even though there was a good faith reason and evidence that it could have happened that way. And now you're seeing the Biden administration start sounding like critics of COVID lockdowns. The critics, if they had echoed some of the things the Biden administration is saying right now, well, we do know that if they had said some of those things the Biden administration is saying right now, they would have been knocked out as well by Twitter or the social media platforms. So I don't think the law allows them to do what's being done. Obviously, Judicial Watch is always looking at our legal options. But I want you to know that TikTok has banned me. The biggest platform in the world, I've been banned for no reason. They just told me I'm banned, gave me no reason for doing it, other than violating their community guidelines. They gave me no warning. So, but we're in response, I'm not going to back down. We're going to continue to get the word out via social media, not only on the legacy platforms, but on the new competitive platforms. President Trump is now, in his private capacity, putting out a platform that I think it's called Truth Social. And I think it's going to open next month on President's Day, according to the news reports I read just today. So there'll be another alternative, and I'm sure others will pop up as well. So I encourage you to follow Judicial Watch everywhere. And to the degree reasonable, you should be everywhere too, because you may be relying on one platform to get news and information and then find your access cut off, or the places that you get news and information from on that platform being cut off from you. So you need to know where to go. And so I encourage you to follow us on the legacy platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and also the newer ones, the competitors, Parler, Getter, Rumble, Telegram, etc. So we're not going to let the censorship get us down. We're just going to keep on pushing forward. That being said, I want to talk about some new litigation that we have about something that is very sensitive, because the left is very nervous about something, and they're very nervous that people will look carefully and closely at something called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And just saying it is likely to get me banned. I'm serious, because the left is very nervous about it. And it's a system that allows doctors, physicians, and it's run by HHS, the Health and Human Services, and patients. You can go on and report adverse events that you think are tied to a vaccine. Now, the fact that there are, and this is why this is the dishonesty here. They say the obvious, which is just because they're on the system and it's publicly accessible, doesn't mean that the adverse events reported on the system actually are caused by the vaccines they're attributed. So if someone says, I went in and got sick from COVID, from my COVID vaccine, the warning is, well, don't presume that actually is the case. Well, of course. But the system has to provide some information and some evidence. And the purpose of it is to provide warning to the government. And because it's publicly available, people can go on and look at it and figure out, even given the caveats, what the various issues are with the various vaccines. It's useful for the public health. That's why it's there. But they don't want you to access it because the adverse events that have been reported as it relates to COVID is something that they don't like people knowing about, even with the caveats I'm talking about. So if there's an event, the worst obviously is death. So when people say people have died as a result of the COVID vaccine, all the fact checkers say, no, that's not the case. There have been deaths reported on this adverse event reporting system. It doesn't necessarily mean that the death is attributable to COVID. It is, though, a piece of information from my perspective that needs to be pursued. So accordingly, we have a request, or we had I should say accordingly, but we had following up on that, we had a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, on a kind of a separate issue. We sent a request to last year, I guess it's now 2022, to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, to all emails sent to and from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky's referencing the terms antibody-dependent enhancement, ADE, which is obviously short, pathological priming, pre-priming, paradoxical immune enhancement, and/or disease enhancement. So I'm hesitant to describe what antibody-dependent enhancement is. So I encourage you to look it up. But my general understanding is that it's a general issue of if someone has too much in the way, if the experts say, well, let's say you get 15 boosts or some crazy number, or just one or whatever, they're concerned that it will actually cause more problems in terms of your immune response than it solves. Antibody-dependent enhancement. So you can kind of, the words explain themselves, but I encourage you to look it up online so you get a specific definition. But I'm not telling you about the FOIA lawsuit or the request, because we didn't even have to sue for these documents. So hooray, CDC, we got some documents without having to sue. But we received documents about a kind of maybe a related issue. I don't know, but it was given to us obviously it's related because we got the documents in response to this request. On June 28, 2021, Walensky forwarded an article titled CDC reportedly probing Michigan teen's death after COVID vaccination. And that was a Washington Times article. And in the email, she writes, any details on this? Dr. Henry Walke, who is director of CDC's Division of Preparedness and Emerging Infections, forwarded Walensky's request to another official, David Fitton, who replied, the case has been recorded to VAERS, which is, as I said, the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And by the way, if you put something on the if you've had an adverse event, you can go and report it. But be warned, don't go and make up stuff and put it on there because it's a crime. The left and those who don't want you to see it say, oh, anyone can post anything. Well, that's true. What if they do? It's a crime. And the email goes on to say the CDC has spoken with the medical examiner, but we are following protocol for follow-up. Ray the case. Additionally, CDC remains in contact with Michigan to assist in the investigation. So another official followed up the same day, writing, for awareness, these are further details. This case was reported through VAERS, and the investigation is proceeding. So in this case, there was a report of a death, and there was a follow-up by health officials in Michigan, and in this case, the head of the CDC herself, Walensky, after she saw a news article. I don't know. The emails don't denote whether she found out about it prior to the news article, and the news article said, "Oh, well, yeah, what's going on here?" And she followed up as a result of that. But either way, the other CDC official writes from safety team. So the safety team says CDC is not actively involved in this investigation, i.e., IDBP examining specimens. So I guess they're, I'm not quite sure what that stands for. We have made contact with the state health department and the pathologist who did the autopsy and are in touch to maintain situational awareness. The initial report is in VAERS, and we will receive the final autopsy report when it is complete. I can't speak to how the report got his or her information, how the reporter got his or her information and came to his or her conclusions, but this is being investigated at the state level, as are all deaths. The autopsy was completed when we contacted the state health department, and no request for CDC assistance has been made. The patient was a male, aged 13 years, with no notable medical history. He was found unresponsive 2 days after vaccination. Aside from a fever, he was in his usual state of health prior to his demise. CDC and the state health department are in communication about this case, which remains under investigation. The pathologist indicated that there appeared to be bilateral ventricular enlargement with histology consistent with myocarditis. Excuse me, myocarditis. But those were preliminary findings. Walkie forwarded this email, Walensky's deputy forwarded this email to Walensky, who responded grateful for the information. So there you have it. You have the head of the CDC investigating a death reported on VAERS as tied to the COVID vaccine. It's not clear if they ultimately determined the death was tied to the COVID vaccine officially, but here we have information. And I'd like to know what other deaths they've been investigating and what other conclusions they've drawn. I mean, this is what I think is interesting about this. It can't be every day that the head of the CDC starts messing around asking for specifics on a specific report. And as you may know, there have been many, many deaths reported. And I want to know what's been the follow-up. How many deaths have been confirmed and how many have not been confirmed? So you can bet we're going to follow up on that. There's other information about our material that, the initial request, which is the antibody dependent enhancement. It's extremely convoluted, so I'm not going to read it to you. So go to our website at judicialwatch.org. Maybe we'll have a link to the release in the material below. But the American people have a right to know as much as possible about the safety of the COVID vaccines. The more information, the better. The CDC needs to be more transparent about its investigation of COVID vaccine adverse events, including deaths reported on VAERS. So why is this important? Because policy decisions are made based on the safety and efficacy of the drug or the vaccines. Look, there's a Supreme Court argument this week about Biden's abusive and what I believe to be vindictive vaccine mandates requiring employers with employees over 100 people to mandate vaccines of their employees or institute a testing and masking policy. It's a mandate. And I listened to the bunch of the oral argument earlier. It was kind of a nightmare. I mean, you had Justice Sotomayor talk about, well, there are 100,000 kids with serious COVID complications in hospitals. It's not true. 3,000 or so. 3,000. And she's saying 100,000. And there have been representations made about the safety, the efficacy of the vaccine that came up in the hearing. So the more we know, the better, because A, we have a right to know the details of a medicine or a vaccine that we're being asked to use. And B, we have a really desperate need to know if we're going to be forced to use it, or our kids are going to be forced to take it before they go to school or anything like that. So Walensky's got to own up and come up with more information about this. What happened? Did this 13-year-old boy die or not? I don't know. In response to getting the vaccine, I don't know. certainly it's intriguing that she wanted to know. So we got more, that we haven't even filed a lawsuit on this. So I don't know if they're going to withhold anything and we have to sue about. But either way, we're going to be continuing to be asking the tough questions about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, because the media has an agenda. And the agenda is, if you question anything related to the vaccines, you're derided as a baboon, a Neanderthal, or even worse, a Trump supporter. But with Omicron and the fact that it's spreading so widely, and we're being told things about the vaccine in terms of how well it works about in terms of preventing you from getting Omicron, or how severely it makes you sick if you have the vaccine, who knows what's going on? We want the details. And we're not giving up on the issue as it relates to China, as it relates to Fauci spinning his head with contradictory advice, it seems, every few weeks. Because the media isn't going to ask tough questions, and Congress is just, supine. It's up to Judicial Watch. Similarly, there's this major corruption issue with the Justice Department and Attorney General Garland. You may recall he issued this memo in response to a false letter from the National School Boards Association criticizing Americans and parents who were showing up at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. That was the implication of the letter. And Garland, in response, almost immediately launched an initiative involving the FBI and counterterrorism elements of the federal government to start targeting this issue. It was widely acknowledged by most normal people, looked at it as an obvious political ploy to intimidate Americans from criticizing CRT. And of course, it was happening. What was the date of the memo? October 4th, so a month before the election. Remember, CRT was a big election issue. So what better way to interfere in the election and intimidate people from opposing CRT and educating their fellow Americans about it than by having it be known that the FBI might be looking into you if you do it. So what Judicial Watch did was what we did is what we always do, which was we ask more questions about it. Congress asked questions and they just, it just disappears. Well, Judicial Watch asks questions and then we sue if we don't get answers. And so we asked the FBI for documents about this memo. And of course, we got the proverbial hand to the face. So we sued in federal court. Garland, again, he testified. He admitted he based the memo on the letter from the National School Boards Association. Now, the School Boards Association, after a lot of outrage, issued an apology for the letter. So they even walked it back. And I found, and Judicial Watch found information showing that Director Wray, the FBI director, I went and talked to an event, and he said, "Look, they didn't," and I think his deputy was there too. So I don't know who said what, but basically this is what was said by one or both. The DOJ issued the memo without talking to the FBI first, and Wray said, "We're not going to be going over and trampling people's First Amendment rights. We're only going to investigate actual violence." Which I thought was dishonest because they got their counterterrorism center going right after this memo was issued. So the FBI did jump after Garland demanded that they do that. But you had Wray trying to back away from Garland's memo. So a lot of controversy here. And we've already been around, this is kind of the same type of intimidation and abuse that we've seen for years now here in Washington, D.C. I mean, it first came into national prominence with Obama and Democrats in Congress sicking the IRS and other agencies. They wanted to jail people, the DOJ and FBI, on the Tea Party. The Tea Party. Remember the IRS abuse, Lois Lerner? And then, of course, Trump is targeted by the FBI and DOJ and the White House and NSA and the CIA and the NSA and the Pentagon and the Defense Department and the State Department, I mean, over the Russiagate smears concocted by Hillary and company. And now it was January 6th. Now it's January 6th. I'll talk about that in a minute. And now criticism of CRT, again, politically inconvenient criticism, because it's mobilizing voters who are likely to vote against the current power, Democratic Party in Congress, in the states, and the presidency. So they need to suppress it. So here you go. Here's the FBI and DOJ showing up to help suppress the political opposition of the leftists in power. The Biden administration wants to target parents as terrorists, let's be clear, by abusing the FBI and the DOJ to intimidate those who oppose racist and anti-American critical race theory. And of course, now Judicial Watch has had to file a Freedom of Information Act federal lawsuit against the DOJ and the FBI. They're kind of the same agency, practically speaking, at least legally here in this case, over their cover-up mode over this shocking abuse of power. I mean, when's the last time you heard about Garland sicking the FBI on parents? They moved along. We're not going to move along. And on top of that, of course, we have our critical race theory litigation on behalf of teachers who've been abused and fired for opposing it, parents as well. We're working with parents across the country to find out what the schools are teaching. And we have our own litigation and FOIA to find out more about the CRT teachings as well, not only in the schools, but in West Point and in the federal government generally. So Judicial Watch, we hear about these scandals, and more often than not, Judicial Watch is the only one following up on them. People say, well, how are you able to get these documents? Well, how do you decide what to do? It's pretty easy. I say this, half jokingly, but we see a big story in the news about a major corruption issue, and we start asking questions about it. And the shocking thing is we're often the only one asking questions about it. And in this case, we'll probably get documents no one else will get as a result of our federal court litigation. Again, that we wouldn't be able to file without your support. So thank you for that. So we heard a lot of noise this week, and I call it the January 6th propaganda week. It was, I don't know if you were watching TV, on January 6th or following it online, but the Democratic political media complex smearing and defamation of tens of millions of Americans to advance their agenda using January 6th as a pretext was some of the ugliest activity I've ever seen here in Washington, D.C. It was awful. It was truly awful. And you had Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi giving out false information about police officers killed in the line of duty related to January 6th. No officer died that day. Officer Sicknick died the next day from natural causes. They say officers committed suicide after January 6th. I'm not aware that January 6th was behind those suicides. Are you? The only person killed on January 6th were Trump supporters. Well, persons killed on January 6th was Trump supporters. The only person officially deemed to have died via homicide on January 6th at that disturbance was Ashley Babbitt, who was needlessly shot by a U.S. Capitol Hill police officer. So what you heard about with January 6th was basically, it was all pretextual to further help the left obtain and retain power and oppress their opposition. Because the thinking is, when you hear people like Vice President Harris defame Americans by suggesting that if you question the election, you're an insurrectionist or an Al Qaeda type terrorist, or this is new to me, you're like the Japanese who bombed Pearl Harbor. Their goal, and it's been quite clear, certainly in Biden's vicious speech, is to use January 6th as a pretext to undermine election security. So that's an interesting way to defend democracy, by making it more likely that elections could be changed through fraud. The purpose of election security measures like voter ID are to make it harder to change elections through fraud. But the left wants to undermine all those security measures. That's why they oppose Judicial Watch's efforts to clean up the rolls. That's why they oppose voter ID. That's why they support ballot harvesting. So they're going to be pushing for federalization of the elections. The federalization is objectionable enough, but it's the details that are terrible in terms of the federalization would eventually surely end voter ID, require abusive vote by mail mandates, and put ballot harvesting across the land. Ballot harvesting is giving your ballot to a third party and hoping the person gets it to the election box or polling place. You can imagine that's a major opportunity for fraud. So that's what's going on. That's what January 6th was about. And of course, there are all sorts of other political reasons they were trying to maximize the January 6th narrative. The other reason to maximize the January 6th narrative in terms of government corruption is by focusing on, it's kind of boring to say, oh, well, there was a major protest, a First Amendment legitimate protest that got out of hand and resulted in assaults on police officers and people doing things in the Capitol they weren't allowed to do that caused the risk to the public safety. Straightforward analysis. I have no doubt there were people afraid on the Hill that day. It was scary. I was watching it on TV. It looked scary to me. Police officers were injured. American citizens died. Ashley Babbitt was shot recklessly by Lieutenant Byrd. But the big question is, how did that peaceful protest turn into a riot? And so that falls on, in my view, Nancy Pelosi, who is queen of the Hill when it comes to making sure that the Capitol is secure. The security was lacking, and that provided an opportunity for agitators and those who were looking to cause trouble to get away with it. Riots happen because of poor decision making by police officials and the politicians who run them, or who they would, quote, report to, in the case of Nancy Pelosi. So where's the accountability there? Now, Judicial Watch is in federal court right now asking, for instance, for emails about January 6th from the U.S. Capitol Police. We're asking for all the videos. And they've come back with respect to the videos, at least, and have said that not 1 second of video can be released to Judicial Watch. They're not, quote, public records, and the public doesn't have an interest in releasing them. So serving all sorts of privileges there, right? This is the same House that is trying to throw their political opponents in jail for asserting privileges in their subpoena fights with the 1-6 Rump Committee. And why do I call it Rump Committee? Because Rump is another way of calling it illegitimate. It's a one-party committee that has no representatives blessed by the Republicans. So it's a committee that's a totalitarian and authoritarian in nature. That's the way one-party governments operate. No opposition, no check. They're not only targeting innocent Americans, by perusing and trying to get their phone records, but they're also trying to target members of Congress. So they're trying to blow up the Congress as well, blow up the House. So this is extremism, and it's against democracy, as they like to say. And it's extremism that's coming from Joe Biden. You could see that in his speech, and you see it with the operations of the 1-6 committee. And we're not going to be distracted. We're just going to keep on asking the questions we've been asking, getting information out that no one else is able to get because no one else is brave enough to ask. And we're certainly not going to be intimidated for trying to protect our elections and make sure they're safer and more secure. So we have lawsuits that are ongoing to try to clean up the rolls in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Colorado. And we've warned other states and counties in New York and Oregon, California, that they got to clean up their rolls. I mean, 12 million names on the rolls in the counties we looked at. And these counties have removed 33 names in total over the last 4 years under the law. It should have been tens of thousands of names they were removing. So there's a lot of work to do, and we're doing it. Another thing you hear about the left is how the Republicans are trying to rig the elections by gerrymandering. Now, gerrymandering is the system or is the process. It's a way of describing redistricting. It's a pejorative word for redistricting. And redistricting happens every 10 years, at least with respect to congressional districts, in response to census numbers. And so the state legislatures do that. And gerrymandering is kind of the abuse of redistricting, where you see these ridiculous maps that don't make any sense. They in the case that we're going to talk about in Maryland, one observer said it looked like a pterodactyl on the map. And the question is redistricting legal? I mean, gerrymandering legal? Now, Democrats have said that the Republicans are abusing their power to gerrymander people and districts based on race improperly or other improper factors. So there are all these political fights and lawsuits going on, and I'm sure the Republicans are unhappy with Democrat gerrymanders as well. You know, in my view, politics and redistricting go hand in hand. The majority party that runs the legislature in the state is typically going to try to set up a system that benefits their party. And the question is, do they do that within reason, or do they abuse their power? And in the case of Maryland, it looks like they abused their power. I'm going to show you the map. I'm hoping we can put it up. I'm going to show you the map. Take a look at it. So you can see this Maryland gerrymander. I mean, do those districts look normal to you? Do they look any way based on communities or mutual interests within a state? Of course not. One of the gerrymander districts in Maryland is connected by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which is, I think, a 3-mile wide long bridge. You know, imagine that being your connection to your fellow members, your fellow citizens. You're the other side of the giant Chesapeake Bay. It's like being on the other side of an ocean. That's the way. That's what's been going on in Maryland. Maryland's been notorious for years on this. We had tried to sue before. Now we're suing again under the state constitution. We're representing voters in each of the 12 districts in Maryland. And the grounds are that it diminishes their rights to participate in elections for the U.S. Congress on an equal basis with other Maryland voters. I mean, if you're crammed into a district where your vote is essentially nullified, or it's not appropriate. The goal of redistricting is to make sure that voters in the end are able to pick their politicians, their elected representatives, as opposed to the politicians picking who the voters are and rigging the system that way. The lawsuit details that we filed last month that Maryland's recent history of partisan gerrymandering is no secret. As I said, in 2011, their congressional map remained one of the most notorious partisan gerrymanders in U.S. history. A federal district court openly doubted that it could provide, quote, fair and effective representation for all citizens. Another called it absurd to suggest that there is a community of interest in a district described as a Warshart-like eyesore. A federal appeals court famously described the same district as a broken-winged pterodactyl lying prostrate across the center of the state. So think of the map of Maryland. Think of the panhandle of Maryland, Western Maryland, which is very different than the district Montgomery County, Maryland, which is just here in Washington, D.C., or just outside of Washington, D.C. We have districts that connect the far rural part of the state with the most, some of the most urban areas. And the irony is, what they do is they treat Black people as pawns in these gerrymanderings, because for Democrats who controlled Maryland, Democratic voters are key, and because American Blacks tend to be mostly Democrat, they're very valuable in redistricting fights. So they take Black communities and put them in districts to help white liberal congressmen get reelected. So you have Black communities in Baltimore being stuck with communities far from them. And it's not the same community. So the irony is it discriminates against voters of all races, of all parties. And that's what I love about Judicial Watch's lawsuit. We're trying to protect all citizens and all voters. Now, there was a commission in Maryland that came up with a little bit more of a sensible plan, but that was rejected. So the legislature, which is controlled by Democrats, did what they wanted to do. And, again, I'm not naive. I understand politics comes into redistricting. And, but in this case, it was an abuse of power, given the nature of the districts. The lawsuit details how the map distorts district lines, deviates from and crosses existing political boundaries, and fractures and divides communities of interest. Maryland's plan splits Anne Arundel County into three congressional districts. Anne Arundel is a county, as I said, near the congressional, near the Chesapeake Bay. It's near where the Naval Academy is. The middle of Anne Arundel County is connected to the Eastern Shore's first congressional district. The Eastern Shore is the shore of Maryland. The two areas are held together solely via the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Baltimore is divided among three congressional districts. This is what I was talking about, having Black communities eviscerated by these districts. Montgomery County is divided among four congressional districts. Montgomery County is a big county. Well, I think it's the biggest in the state outside of Baltimore. A roughly 20-mile trip north on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway from Cheverly, Maryland, a DC suburb, to Jessup, Maryland, an area just outside Baltimore, would cross congressional boundaries 6 times and lead a traveler through 5 different congressional districts. So just think, you go 20 miles, you go through 6 congressional districts on one highway. There's an umbilical cord designed to include Democrat voters in College Park to counterbalance the more Republican voters in the southern part of the state. So College Park is up near here in Washington, D.C. So to help Democrats down south in Maryland, where it's more conservative, they took a bunch of voters from College Park and stuck them in a place that they probably would never travel to. It just goes on and on. I told you about the panhandle of Maryland being tied to Montgomery County as well, just in the opposite direction, south to north. As a federal court commented about a district in 2011, which had similar problems that we're talking about, it brings together voters who have no interest in farming, mining, tourism, paper products, paper production, and the hunting of bears, with voters who abhor the hunting of bears and do not know what a coal mine or paper mill even looks like. These two groups have different climates, root for different sports teams, and read different newspapers. I think the equivalent would be putting. I know the distance is much greater, but it's the equivalent. Putting counties around Buffalo in a district near New York City. Two areas of the same state that are worlds apart. And we argue that the plan violates the Maryland Constitution, which guarantees voters the right to free and frequent elections and the right of suffrage. Article 7 has been held to even be more protective of rights of political participation than the provisions of the federal Constitution. And there's Article 3 of the Maryland Constitution, and you should look at your state constitutions to see what rights it protects. Because everyone knows generally, if you're politically active, what the Constitution protects at the federal level, but you should see what your state protects as well. Article 3, Section 4 says, each legislative district shall consist of adjoining territory, be compact in form, and substantially equal population. Due regard shall be given to natural boundaries and the boundaries of political subdivisions. So I want to put up the map of that Maryland district redistricting map again. So does that map look like it has adjoining territory, compact? I guess substantially equal populations almost have to happen. Natural boundaries and the boundaries of political subdivisions? No, of course not. You can see that. So this lawsuit, which we just filed, and we should know relatively soon whether it's going to go forward, seeks to protect the rights of all voters and citizens, and simply makes the point that politicians, as I said, shouldn't be able to pick their voters. It needs to be the other way around. So this is, you always hear the left complaining about redistricting by evil conservatives who are targeting people based on race, when in fact the most abusive redistricting then in the country right now looks to be in Maryland. And it's being run by the left and their partisan allies. And Judicial Watch is stepping up. And of course, the Justice Department pretends to be interested in issues like this, but because it is partisan and corrupt, it's going to ignore it. And Judicial Watch has to come in and try to vindicate the rule of law in Maryland, not only on this election matter, but other election law cases. With that, I encourage you to find out more about Judicial Watch's efforts to protect clean and fair elections at our website at judicialwatch.org. And I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update.